please be seated? The man getting a haircut glanced over toward the waiting area. An old-timer sat reading the morning edition of the Jerusalem Post, as he did most mornings, holding it open to its full size in front of him. The man couldn't help but notice the blaring headlines on the front page. Returning exiles disappointed. That was all the talk at the barbershop, had been for days. The man reading the paper shook his head, a disgusted look on his face. Jerusalem's going through hard times, he said. What else is new? He was right, of course. It had been 500 years since King David established the city as his capital, still remembered by many as the glory days of Israel. His son, Solomon, expanded the borders, but he couldn't quite get a handle on the internal strife. After he died, the kingdom split in two and could offer little resistance to petty squabbles from within and invasions by superpowers from without. 50 years before our barbershop conversation, the Babylonians finally destroyed the temple, devastating the city and breaking the will of the people. They carried off most of the political leadership, along with the professional tradesmen, physicians, back to their capital to live in exile and serve their empire. Now the Persians had taken over from the Babylonians, and their emperor, Cyrus, instituted a policy change, releasing any of the Hebrew people who wanted to go back home. Most actually stayed. They'd grown accustomed to the place. But a few returned, eager to pick up where they left off when they had been so unceremoniously driven out. But if they expected to return to the glory days, they were sadly disappointed. The reality was very different than the memory. The temple still lay in ruins, as did most of the other buildings, reflecting the disposition of those who remained. They felt lonely and sad, feeling abandoned by God and their fellow citizens, even angry. Most people in the city resigned themselves to their fate. The track record of their political leaders wasn't stellar. Why should this current crop be any different? Editorial writers lamented the pitiful conditions and called for action, but they didn't seem to have any fresh ideas either about a way forward. Nobody seemed interested in doing very much but complain. Well, almost nobody. Buried in the back pages of the newspaper was the latest message from Pastor Isaiah from down at the temple. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. He and the little group of preachers he represented had been saying these things like this for quite a while. Most people thought they were either out of touch with reality or cruelly playing with their emotions. What genius would look at all the bombed-out houses and dilapidated streets and see anything but darkness all around and dark days ahead? But these preachers were persistent in their message. And a few of the folks were beginning to think these mysterious men might be able to see something that nobody else could. It's easy to think of the Hebrew prophets as wistful dreamers, out of touch with the real world. But let's not write them off so quickly. The prophets knew the situation, but they were painting a picture of Jerusalem as it could be, as it would be again. When Moses led the people through the wilderness out of Egypt, the glory of the Lord was a physical presence, a glow resting on top of the Ark of the Covenant, and then again on the altar in the permanent temple. The glory is still with us, the prophets cried. Look around. Can you see it? You've resigned yourself that things will never change, and you've become trapped in the past. Live out of your imagination, not out of your history. In this vision, Isaiah sees a great caravan headed toward Jerusalem. In the past, this usually meant invading armies, bearing down with hostile intent. But these travelers he sees are coming with joy. Isaiah sees all the Hebrew people who had been scattered around the world, either by force or by escaping oppression and disease, and they're coming home. And look over there, the great nations to whom they had paid so much in bribes and taxes over the centuries, they are approaching with wagons loaded with treasure, precious metals such as gold and expensive perfumes, including frankincense. Isaiah is not being naive. He's just looking through the eyes of faith, shaped by the promises of God, and now he's inviting the people to live into that reality. From the rubble-scattered landscape of Isaiah's day, let's flash forward another 500 years. Jerusalem has become a thriving city once again, but it's not exactly what Isaiah had envisioned. Instead of a little outpost on the fringes of the Persian Empire, Palestine is now occupied by the Romans. They're much more hands-on, asserting their dominance in person. They installed a puppet ruler, a man named Herod, who calls himself the King of the Jews. He knows that his claim to this title is weak, so he tries to impress the people with massive infrastructure projects, such as rebuilding the temple and eliminating any potential rivals, including, sadly, one of his own wives and members of his own family. Even Caesar Augustus recognized Herod's paranoia when he said, "I would rather be Herod's pig than his son." I doubt that Herod paid much attention to all the traffic in and around Jerusalem. But if he did, he would have received a report about a caravan headed that direction from the east. Just a small group, really, who appeared to represent little threat. Some called them magi, or wise ones. Others would have described them as wizards, or magicians, even astrologers. Those who watch the heavens for signs portending major events in the present and providing a window into the future. These men had noticed a particular light in the western sky, a star with unusual brilliance, and they set out to follow it. When it led them to Jerusalem, they assumed that the star must be announcing the birth of an important person, probably one who would even become King of the Jews. News this momentous would surely be known to everyone, wouldn't it? So they stopped people on the street, asking about this special child. No one had a clue what they were talking about. But the visitors did notice that whenever they mentioned a new king of the Jews, that people looked about themselves nervously to see who was watching. Soon the whole city was on edge, fearing how Herod would react when he got wind of these rumors. For his part, Herod decided to play it cool and invited these strange visitors to come in for a chat, to get more details, see if he could help them. At least that's what he would tell them. Herod asked his council of religious scholars if there was any clue in the ancient text that might shed light on this subject. Well, the prophet Micah did mention that a ruler would come out of Bethlehem, they told him. Maybe that's where they need to go. It appears that you're very close, Herod told the visitors. Go down the road about 9 miles to Bethlehem, and don't stop looking until you find this special child. And when you do, let me know at once. I can't wait to go there myself and pay my respects. If the Magi are the good guys in this story, this is time for the audience to hiss and boo at Herod. He's like the Grinch without the soft edge. No amount of singing around the tree or peering into Cindy Lou Who's big eyes will move him in the least. Herod is all about power and control and he'll maintain it by any means necessary. Whether that means bullying the local populace, threatening his advisors, using secrecy and deception on these out-of-towners, or even killing small children if it comes to that. Meanwhile, Mary and Joseph would give anything to have just a normal day. Ever since an angel appeared to Joseph in a dream to announce an unusual birth, their lives have been upended, being asked to navigate big issues that nothing in their unassuming backgrounds prepared them to handle. But just as they get their child down for a nap, they hear camels grunting outside the door. And in comes a delegation. Obviously, these folks are not from around here. Their guests saw that, "What are you doing here?" look in their faces. "We were following the light and stopped here over your house," they said. "We have traveled a long ways to worship this special child." And with that, they presented their gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. "Your light has come. Nations will come to your light. They will come with joy, bearing gifts." Isaiah's vision is becoming a reality right before their eyes, down to the gold and frankincense. But it appears that this story has taken an unexpected twist. Instead of a large-scale movement of people, equipment, and supplies, what we have is a little band of travelers going wherever the light takes them, even if it is to the humble house of a poor family. Against all appearances and expectations, the Magi are wise enough and in tune enough to recognize that the light of love and hope cannot be stopped. If it can't shine from the palace, it will flicker in the back alley. If it's not welcome in the fine dining establishments, it will grace the table where the child eats alone in the cafeteria. If attempts are made to co-opt it in the halls of power, it will spark to life in emergency rooms and at the grill of McDonald's. In the Western Church, the visit of the wise men became associated with the season of Epiphany very early. These are the first Gentiles, non-Jews, to acknowledge Jesus as the Messiah and to worship him. Like many aspects of the Christmas story, they've been romanticized over time. The text doesn't tell us how many there were, for instance, but there were 3 gifts, so people assumed it must be a party of 3. One tradition even names them: Balthazar of Arabia, Melchior of Persia, and Gaspar of India. Luke doesn't mention them at all in his gospel, and Matthew indicates that they visited when Jesus was maybe a couple of years old. But they show up every December, right there in the manger scenes, in attendance at the birth. Evidently, they couldn't wait to get there. But I believe the wise men also represent us. We also have a hunger in our souls to connect to that which is bigger than ourselves. We also scan the horizon, looking for the light that will guide us to the source of truth and love. The wise men encourage us to venture forth on that journey, even if we're not exactly sure of the destination, even if we take a few wrong turns, encounter some monsters along the way. And when we arrive, may we be as willing to put aside our expectations as they were, willing to see things as they are so that we can recognize the light of God in the most unlikely of places. Many times when we talk about the light of God, it appears in vivid brightness, brilliant colors in stained glass, white lilies in bloom, Jesus as the sun that lights the heavenly city. But I'm struck by how often the light is more subdued. Our colorful wrapping paper and multicolored lights at Christmas contrast with the sepia tones of John the Baptist in the desert, and the soft glow of candlelight surrounding the child calmly sleeping in his mother's arms. And so here, when the wise men offer their gifts, there is the expected gold and frankincense. But then they open one more package: myrrh. Myrrh is a burial spice. That seems an inappropriate, even crass gift for a baby, doesn't it? Except we know where this story is going. The light of God entering the world in Bethlehem will be challenged and appear to be snuffed out in a few years on the lonely hill just a few miles from where they're standing. But it will come back. The light of love always comes back, no matter how dark the night. And it is to that to which we cling. Amen.